for this generous introduction. First of all, I'd like to say hello to everybody and welcome to an almost typical lecture from my World Literature 101W course on the short story. I'm aware that some of you might have read for this lecture a handful of dates. We will not be doing a handful of dates. I decided to do another one instead. Sorry about that. Okay, well, so let's begin. And stories, you know, that's what we're interested in. They have always been a crucial element of every human culture for as long as language itself has existed. Indeed, it might even be the case that language itself was developed in order to tell stories. And I hope that by the end of this little lecture, it'll be clear why the study of stories is a priority in any good university. The second priority of World Literature 101W is to teach the skills you will need for writing in the university and beyond. We in World Literature take this responsibility seriously and are proud of our students' performance. I might add that the writing component of this course fulfills a university writing requirement. So no matter what you decide to major in, this course will satisfy your needs in writing. So let's just note that there will be two differences between this lecture and the ones you get in my World Literature 101W course. Students usually read the stories before class and we discuss them. But today I'll read two very short stories and we'll discuss them afterwards. And the second difference is that I won't be talking about the course writing requirement, although I'd be happy to respond to any questions about it after the lecture. So, speaking of questions, did you read about what happened in Belgium? A man went shopping and put his 2-year-old son and pet poodle in a shopping trolley. Reaching his car, he realized he had forgotten something. So he placed the toddler and the dog in the car and returned to the market. When he came back, he saw his son, bloody and crying. The dog turned a blood-smeared snout toward him, and the man immediately grabbed the dog and stomped it to death, only then to discover a still twitching rat that had crawled out from the sack of potatoes in the back seat. Now, this report was carried in 3 Belgian newspapers in March 1981 and is in fact completely untrue, although the newspaper editors and newspaper readers at the time did not know this. This fake news story is an updated version of a famous folk tale known as the Brahman and the Mongoose, one of many moralistic narratives from the Indian collection known as the Panchatatra, composed more than 2,000 years ago and is still popular today. So why do I begin with such a gruesome story? First, it shows the emotional power of storytelling as we whipsaw from an everyday domestic scene to the horror of an animal attack on a child, to a father's righteous vengeance, and finally to the man's remorse and distress at having killed the savior of his child. Second, it shows the viral mobility and longevity of the Panchatatra as it passed from the Sanskrit language in India to China and points east to Indonesia and west into Persia and the Arab world, where it became widely known as Kalila Wadimna, and thence into Europe, where it was incorporated into the fables of La Fontaine, reaching all the way to Iceland and the New World more than 3 centuries ago. A third, and actually most important point in the Brahman and the Mongoose is that it shows the moral value of storytelling. The human brain processes some 400 billion bits of information a second, but we are aware of only an infinitesimal 2,000 of those, and we act on far fewer still. So how does our mind know which bits to act on and how? I'll argue that human beings have evolved the capacity for storytelling as a way of framing information into meaningful wholes. Which elements of my environment are important? What should I watch out for to ensure biological life? What is morally good? What is immoral? Stories help us respond to these big questions. But you already knew this. Think about the stories of your religious background, the stories that your parents tell you, and you'll find wisdom like that of the Brahman and the Mongoose. The world's stories are like an external hard drive. Some you have already downloaded, others you can access and interiorize to make you who you want to become. So if you're still with me, you may be wondering, does this mean that we're just channeling stories that our parents, teachers, and the media feed us? Well, no. Stories do not determine us. We choose them, which is why it is important to choose wisely, because some stories are dangerous. Studying literature helps us to evaluate stories, those we already live by and those of others, in order to survive and thrive in this world. In this course, we build a toolbox of techniques for analyzing stories. Today, we'll consider just one such tool: repetition. So let me pause here for just a moment if you have any questions or comments up to now. Okay. There'll be plenty of time later for questions in any case. Okay, so let me read another story and let you think about repetition as we go back to 1931 and witness a young couple, barely older than yourselves, in a train to New York on their honeymoon. The young man in the new blue suit finished arranging shiny luggage in the compartment. He sat down opposite the girl in beige. She looked as new as a peeled egg. On the arch of the sole of one shoe was a tiny price tag. "Well, here we are," he said. "Yeah, here we are." He said, "Well, how does it feel to be an old married lady?" "Oh, it's too soon to ask me that. Goodness, we've only been married about 3 hours." "Well, the nights are going to be pretty long from now on. Well, it starts getting dark early." I didn't have any idea what time it was. Everything was so mixed up. I sort of don't know where I am or what it's all about. Getting back from the church and then all those people and then changing all my clothes and then everybody throwing things and all. Oh, goodness, I don't see how people do it every day. "Well, do what?" "Get married. When you think of all the people all over the world getting married, just as if it was nothing." "Well, let's not worry about all the people around the world. We've got something better to think about. Well, what do we care about them?" "I know, but I just sort of got to thinking of them, all over, everywhere, doing it all the time. At least, getting married, you know? And it's sort of such a big thing to do. You think of them, all doing it just like it wasn't anything. And how does anybody know what's going to happen next?" "Oh, let them worry. We don't have to. We know darn well what's going to happen next. Well, we know it's going to be great, don't we?" "Oh, of course. Only you think of all the people and you have to sort of keep thinking. It makes you feel funny. An awful lot of people that get married, it doesn't turn out so well. And I guess they all must have thought it was going to be great." Oh, come on now. This is no way to start a honeymoon with all this thinking going on. Look at us, all married and everything. I mean, the wedding all done and all. Ah, it was nice, wasn't it? Ellie and Louise looked lovely, didn't they? Oh, listen, I want to tell you something. When I was standing up there in that church waiting for you to come up and I saw those two bridesmaids, I thought to myself, well, I never knew Louise could look like that. Why, she'd have knocked anybody's eyes out. Oh, really? Funny. A lot of people seem to think she looked sort of tired. Well, she was certainly a knockout at the wedding. I'm terribly glad you thought so. I'm glad somebody did. Lots of people, they get married and they think it's going to be great and everything, and then it all goes to pieces. I've seen it happen. Honey, what is all this? Hey, let's look. Look, this is our honeymoon. I guess you're just feeling sort of nervous. Me? What have I got to be nervous about? I mean, goodness, I'm not nervous. Oh, you know, lots of times they say that girls get kind of nervous and yippy on account of thinking about, well, it's like you said, things are all sort of mixed up right now. But afterwards, it'll be all right. I mean, let's don't ever fight ever, okay? Oh, I'm sorry I was cross. I guess I did feel a little bit funny, all mixed up, and then thinking of all those people all over everywhere, and then being sort of way off here, all alone with you. It's so sort of different. It's sort of such a big thing. Yes, don't let's ever fight. We won't be like the whole lot of them. We won't fight or be nasty or anything. I guess I'll just take this hat off and just put it up. Put it up on the rack, will you, dear? Do you like it, sweetheart? Oh, it looks good on you. No, but I mean, do you really like it? Well, I'll tell you. I know this is the new style and everything, but I don't know anything about hats. Only I like that blue hat you had. Gee, I like that hat. Oh, really? Well, that's nice. That's lovely. The first thing you say to me as soon as you get me off on a train away from my family and everything is that you don't like my hat. Well, that's nice, isn't it? Oh, no, honey, I never said anything like that. I only said, what you don't seem to realize is this hat costs $22. And that horrible old blue thing you're so crazy about, that costs $3.95. I don't give a darn what they cost. I said I liked that blue hat. What do you know? What do I know about women's hats? Well, it's too bad. It's too bad you didn't marry somebody that would get the kind of hats you like. Hats that cost $3.95. Why didn't you marry Louise? You always think she looks so beautiful. You'd love her taste in hats. Why didn't you marry her? Oh, now, honey, for heaven's sake. Listen, baby. Well, now that you mention it, why didn't you marry Joe Brooks? I suppose he could have given you all the $22 hats you wanted. Well, Joe Brooks wouldn't have waited until he got me off all alone and then sneered at my taste in clothes. Joe Brooks wouldn't ever hurt my feelings. Joe Brooks has always been fond of me. There. And you've got a lot of nerve to talk about Joe Brooks. You and your friend Louise, all you ever talk about is Louise. Oh, for heaven's sake, what do I care about Louise? I just thought she was a friend of yours, that's all. That's why I ever noticed her. Well, you certainly took an awful lot of notice of her today, on our wedding day. Oh, listen, honey, I never should have said that. How does anybody know what kind of crazy things come into their heads when they're standing there waiting to get married? I know. I've been all sort of mixed up today, too. I told you that. Everything's so strange and everything. And me all the time thinking about all those people all over the world. And now us here, all alone and everything. Oh, baby, what's the matter? Well, I don't know. We used to squabble a lot when we were going together and then engaged and everything. But I thought everything would be so different as soon as you were married. And now I feel so sort of strange and everything. I feel so sort of alone. Well, you see, sweetheart, we're not really married yet. Well, things will be different afterwards. Well, we haven't got much longer to wait now. Well, we'll be in New York in about 20 minutes. Is there anything special you want to do tonight? What? Well, what I mean to say, would you like to go to a show or something? Why, whatever you like. I sort of didn't think people went to theaters and things on their... I mean, I've got a couple of letters I simply must write. Don't let me forget. Oh, you're going to write letters tonight? Well, you see, I've been perfectly terrible. What with all the excitement and everything, I never did thank poor old Mrs. Spragg for her berry spoon. It's just too awful of me. I've got to write her this very night. Well, and when you've finished writing your letters, maybe I could get you a magazine or a bag of peanuts. What? I mean, I wouldn't want you to be bored. As if I could be bored with you, silly. Aren't we married? Bored. Well, what I thought when we got in, we could go right up to the Biltmore and maybe have a little dinner in the room, kind of quiet, and then do whatever we wanted. I mean, well, let's go right to the Biltmore. We might go to some show or other tomorrow night instead of tonight. Don't you think that would be better? Yes, I think it might. He rose, balanced a moment, crossed over, and sat down beside her. Do you really have to write those letters tonight? Well, I don't suppose they'd get there any quicker than if I wrote them tomorrow. There was a silence with things going on in it. And we won't ever fight anymore, will we? Oh, no, not ever. I don't know what made me do it like that. It all got so sort of funny, sort of like a nightmare. The way I got thinking of all those people getting married all the time, and so many of them. Everything spoils on account of fighting and everything. Oh, I don't want to be like them. But we won't be, will we? We won't go all to pieces. We won't fight. It'll all be different now we're married. It'll all be lovely. Reach me down my hat, will you, sweetheart? It's time I was putting it on. Ah, thank you. I'm so sorry you don't like it. I do like it. You said you didn't. You said you thought it was perfectly terrible. I never said any such thing. You're crazy. All right, I may be crazy. Thank you very much. Not that it matters. It's just a little thing. But it makes you feel pretty funny to think you've gone and married somebody that says you have perfectly terrible taste in hats, and then goes and says you're crazy beside. Oh, now listen here. Nobody said any such thing. Why, I love that hat. The more I look at it, the better I like it. I think it's great. Do you really think so? Do you honestly? Oh, I'm so glad. I'd hate you not to like my hat. It would be, I don't know, it would be sort of such a bad start. Well, I'm crazy for it. Now we've got that settled. Ah, baby lamb, we're not going to have any bad starts. Look at us. We're on our honeymoon. Pretty soon we'll be regular old married people. I mean, in a few minutes we'll be getting into New York, and then we'll be going to the hotel, and then everything will be all right. I mean, well, look at us. Here we are, married. Here we are. Yes, here we are, aren't we? So this story, Here We Are by Dorothy Parker, is very simple, but what is it really about? Would anybody like to take a stab at responding to any of these questions or any kind of comment you may have about the story? Well, these are some of the questions that we would ask in a normal class just to get things started. You know, what's remarkable about the story? Did you notice any unusual narrative features? Any uses of language, that kind of thing? Okay. Well, if there are no comments or questions.
We have one of the comments
okay.
that it was dialogue driven. People think that they're different, but also they are the same as everyone else. Somebody else said that they found it interesting how the characters seem to question themselves a lot.
Yes, yes. Good point. Both good points. They think they're different, but they're actually very much like everybody else, and that they question themselves a lot. And I think both of those points kind of direct us to the what I think are some pretty important themes in the text. There any others?
There's one more that, first of all, that the structure of the story seemed quite circular, and that sometimes jumping around the issue specifically draws more attention to the issue as such.
Excellent, excellent. I couldn't agree more. There's something circular about it. It begins and ends in a similar way, and they do seem to be beating around a bush there and not really coming to the point. Good point. So, okay, well, you know, for me, I kind of wonder why we have this roller coaster of emotions in the story. And so I think there are at least three ways of looking at it. I'm sure we could come up with a lot more with just a bit of effort. I mean, at one level, we could read it as a condensation of the universal theme of marriage. And this goes along with the first comment about they are being pretty much like everybody. They are part of an almost universal practice. So but I would say we could continue this by saying then, here we have then almost a condensation of an entire lifetime between this couple. We have, in this few minutes on a train, we go from innocent joy to anxiety, to suspicion, to jealousies, quarrels, and reconciliations. This kind of reading of a story some would call it reading for the plot. And it's a very good way of beginning a reading of any kind of narrative. A narrative is just a fancy word for a story. Okay, what's going on and how, in this case, as I say, a condensation of the universal theme of marriage. Pardon me. We could also read it, another way of reading this story is as a window onto life in a particular time and place. We have a church wedding, we have train travel, we have women's hats, we have a woman described as nervous, yippy, and crazy, which some would say repeats the cliche of female hysteria. This kind of a reading would be a historical, we would call this a historical reading. In other words, we look at the specificity of the story in history, okay? Now let's take a look at one more way of reading this story, using the simple literary tool of paying close attention to repetitions. Things that are repeated, I should say first before we launch into it, things that are repeated are not necessarily important in themselves, but they often point to something significant. So let's consider, for example, the reference to an old married lady at the beginning. At the beginning, it comes as kind of a trite joke. How does it feel to be an old married lady? Ha, ha, ha. But when we read old married people at the end, the meaning is a little bit different, isn't it? To say we're an old married couple at the end comes across somehow as a deep truth of married life. Whether you're young or old, whether it's 1931 or 2020, marriage is an ongoing challenge to deal with another person who, no matter how much you love him or her, has different anxieties, priorities, and vulnerabilities. And that circular form, we would often call it an envelope form that one of the student comments points to, it begs us to ask, what is the difference between the first old married reference and the last old married reference? And I think it's that sense of the dealing with otherness within a marriage, that it emerges in that little train ride, okay? But there are plenty of other repetitions. The bride keeps coming back to people all over the world. And she also mentions 5 times being all alone with her husband. Well, these terms contrast with each other. True, people all over the world get married all the time, but she's got to do it all alone with this one guy. Consider the bride's anxiety. Is he the kind of dude who will run out on her? Maybe with Louise. Will he end up getting in the habit of denigrating her? In other words, maybe going from the hat to calling her fat. Is she going to be in one of those marriages that go to pieces? Another repetition in the story. The bride is not a perfect person, but paying close attention to her repetitions shows us that she's not hysterical either, just indirectly voicing anxiety at the biggest choice she'll ever make, that of a mate. So we could pause here and ask if you noticed any other repetitions that kind of jumped off the page at you, or if you have any other questions. So let me just go ahead, Bettina.
While we're waiting perhaps for people putting in the question about repetition, etc., some of the comments alluded also to the fact that there was this gradually increase of stress and tension between the characters. Yes. And in addition also that, of course, the author uses the emotions to appeal to the readers in this history, in this story.
Yeah. There is a kind of mounting tension. And one way of reading the story is that mounting tension shows that this is going to be a bad marriage. Okay, that's one way of reading it. I'm not sure that that is the kind of reading that I would prefer to take, simply because the tensions do seem to have something of a deflation at the end. But yeah, really good point. What did you say the second comment was about?
The second comment was about, and now there's comments coming on, the appeal to the emotions in the story. Yes. The other thing is as well that Emma mentions that they haven't explored their relationship in themselves deeply enough yet to feel truly known and understood. That New York is mentioned a lot as a place of arrival and destination. Nathan they keep looking ahead rather than to the present. And then finally, Gabrielle comes back to the fact that Louise is repeated as well. So that's so much that she seems to become a representation of an idea more than a person.
Oh, some really good points there. The playing on emotions and the evocation of emotions is brilliant because it does show us, I mean, within the context of the story, how emotions kind of overrule our good judgment, the will to just, chill and be cool. You're on your honeymoon, and yet these, jealousies and anxieties they're bubbling up to the surface, and they come out. And, that's, as she's suggesting in this story, that's part of a marriage. Really good point. The idea of Louise being something of a symbol. Yeah, you've got her presence. Obviously, she's not there, but her presence is felt. Okay. Likewise, Joe Brooks. These are sources of conflict from outside of the unity of the married couple. Yeah, good point. Yeah. Was there something else? There was one other point, wasn't there? No. Okay. All right. Well, we could talk about the anxieties. I mean, I think the point about Louise and also the jealousy of the young man's jealousy of Joe Brooks, these are important anxieties. But also, let's notice how many times, just, almost just plain counting, I don't know if anybody noticed it, but I counted some 30 times that the phrase "I mean" breaks into their dialogue. Now, what's going on there? You know, if you're going to have that phrase breaking into the dialogue 30 times, there's got to be a reason for it, unless we're just in the, in the presence of a poor writer, which one would hope that we're not. And Dorothy Parker is actually quite a clever writer. So I hope you'll forgive me, but when I try to make sense of "I mean," I notice that each time it interrupts their train of thought, it's just as the topic comes around to, how shall I say this? I mean, sex. Yes, there, I said it. Anxiety about sexual compatibility on a wedding night is, of course, a thing of the past. Or is it? Perhaps like other aspects of marriage, it is an ongoing challenge that must be managed from beginning to end. And I think this business of "I mean," remember the student at the beginning, one of the first comments is they're not talking about what they really mean. They're talking around the topic. And the phrase "I mean" comes in, it's repeated, and it points to, without ever saying, what they really mean. And that is a good deal of anxiety about sex. Okay? And whether we're in the world of 1931 or 2020, sex remains and will always remain, I reckon, a difficult topic. Okay? So I said at the beginning that it would be clear by the end of this lecture why the study of stories is a priority in any good university. And I think that even simple stories, like the Brahman and the Mongoose, and here we are, point to this function. Human life unfolds as a series of choices, and each one opens up new paths and closes off others. Good and bad choices are the stuff of a life well lived or of tragedy. Understanding stories helps us to understand choices, and therefore how to build healthy lives and civil society. So that's my, quick and dirty reason for why we study stories, why I present or have built a course around the short story. We have lots of other reasons for building courses, but that's my reason. So let me ask if there are any questions or comments about this course, anything having to do with the course. It doesn't have to be relating to the story or anything that I even mentioned.
Thank you, Professor Seigneurie, for this lecture. I will stop the recording now, so we will move more in the part of